when I'm talking to people who are ideologues, really ideologues of any kind, not just Calvinism, but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
but it seems that the tendencies, the behavioral and the interactive tendencies of an ideological Calvinist tend to very heavily replicate those of a narcissist or a borderline
yeah.
personality disorder person. And I don't know if there's any like I would be very curious to kind of get some kind of clinical trials done to see if there is any real correlation there. And then I would guess like what is the chicken and what is the egg? Does it so happen, does Calvinism tend to attract Calvinists, narcissists, or does it turn them into narcissists? Like I
Yeah,
like that's the
yeah.
chicken or an egg thing. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, that's been my interest lately because once I realized that it wasn't completely differences in exegesis. In fact, sometimes it doesn't seem like that at all. It's an ideologue. It's a systematic that's held on to. I started to ask why. What's the payoff? What from that person's psychology is dictating such a systematic that pretty much changes the nature of God and the nature of Christ and the nature of man and the nature of Scripture, the
Yeah.
nature of man's free will, the nature of the fall. It's doing all these things. And so I began to wonder similar things like what is the goal, the payoff? And so I began to think in clinical terms. And so I'll take us back to childhood a little bit,
Hmm.
um, because I think this will help. I think that we're go through stages in childhood that have to do with a kind of narcissism where we see omnipotent figures. We see our dad who's
Hmm.
stronger than everybody else and controls everything and dictates in the
Hmm.
home. And
Hmm.
whether or not our dad's a narcissist or not, he's Superman, right?
Right.
We have comic books. We have comic book heroes. Thor is my best comic book hero growing up, and I identified with him because there's something that feels good about having a sense that there's omnipotence out there controlling everything,
Hmm.
and that we can sort of come alongside that and join that and be part of that.
Hmm.
And so early on, there are these sort of benign kind of narcissistic fantasies that we may have, and and a part of going into adolescence is dealing with those, and then eventually adulthood, where we start to shed those. And pretty soon in life, but you get old enough, you don't even have any heroes anymore because you don't have these superheroes, right? But you'll still go to Marvel movies and watch Avengers and
Oh yeah.
Superman
We
and those
still,
kind of
yeah.
things
And
because they're
Star
fun.
Wars, yeah.
Yeah, Star Wars, because they bring up the hero
Hmm.
that somehow manages to make it all happen. And I think that when I look at somebody like Augustine, who by 397 AD was combating Gnostic heresy and arguing for free will in all his writings, and all of a sudden in 412, when he's arguing with
Hmm.
Pelagius, he brings in
The old
this
flip flop.
they'll flip flop, and so I've got to look at that and wonder what he felt. I believe if I went back and talked to him, he felt he needed a more powerful God than he had.
Hmm.
And if man has free will, God isn't powerful enough, and he's got to
Hmm.
defeat in this debate this new Pelagian heresy. And I believe that's behind it. Now I don't have much more evidence of that because I can't
Well,
talk to
I,
him.
I would, yeah, it's hard to get evidence on a dead guy, a few centuries removed. But John Vervaeke points out in his series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and he calls on Pierre Hadot to point out basically that Augustine almost single-handedly like created a narcissistic version of Christianity
Yes.
that then persisted ever since he was on the scene.
And that's my argument, I think, basically, Kevin, is that what within him, we're not talking about exegesis now, okay? What within
Yeah.
him produced a need to create this God? And I think that it comes from childhood. I think it comes
Mm.
from wanting this God to be all powerful. And pretty soon, before you know it, you've built a schematic or systematic around some of those features of God. You begin to pick out different scriptures that you pluck out that will support your rendition, and more increasingly so. Then you got Calvin, you got John Edwards, you got a lot of people who really end up creating what I believe is a God who's a narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
He's in control of everything. Doesn't matter what you think or feel. He's choosing. He brushes the rest out of the way, and he chooses. You're just darn lucky that he chose you. You're
Mm-hmm.
blessed to be in
Mm-hmm.
his circle. All he wants is your glory and fandom. He doesn't really love everybody the same way. It's hard to know if he even loves. If he can send somebody to hell, the reprobate, knowing what they're going to experience through eternity,
Right.
and be okay with that, then love isn't the same love that we would think of as Jesus having, for example.
Right.
It's
Right.
not the same thing. In
Jesus
fact,
was
it
very
isn't.
empathetic.
There's no empathy. There's no regard for the person. And so this idea, even in Romans 9, that God chooses one and hates the other, fits really well in Calvinism, as long as you don't go deep enough to figure out how to exegete those passages of Scripture. But I have to believe that the narcissistic God that's created, who is sovereign over all, look at it this way too. You're in a home with a narcissistic father. He's not on the spectrum. He's at the top. He's it, right?
Yeah, he's a 10.
Yeah, he picks out who he cares about, who he gives
Yep.
attention to. You can't question him. He controls everything, usually the money, the time spent, the friends his wife has. He is to be adored and to be surrendered to. He doesn't really care to listen to you and find out how you're doing, because that's not
Right.
of any importance to him unless it benefits him and how he looks out there. And
Right.
so he's
Yeah. So that phrase, unless it benefits him and how he looks out there, I've noticed that there's a huge narrative warfare component to cluster B people. It's all about the perception. What can I make other people perceive?
yes,
Regardless
yes,
of what's really going on. It's my
yes,
ability to make them perceive a certain thing.
yeah. And basically that's because they have no real self. They're very small people underneath it all, which
Right.
is interesting. I've had many situations in directing addiction medicine programs, and even once in a while in private practice, where a narcissist will try to intimidate me. And it's almost impossible to intimidate me unless you're going to beat me up. then you might. But beyond that, you just can't. And I can deal with a narcissist in seconds. They're underneath it all. If they don't have control and they don't have sovereignty and they know it, they just buckle. They don't have any presence anymore. And
Right.
so
That's
uh,
interesting.
they're
Don't have
very
any presence
small.
anymore.
They don't, and they don't to start with, because they don't have anything to give. They're just
Mm-hmm.
taking. But they believe they're
Oh yeah.
perfect. They just want glory. They believe they're everything, and so I start to look at these pastors who seem to delight in talking to their congregations about this topic.
Right.
It's really fascinating to watch. It's almost like they revel in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's because when you're talking about, let's say you're at the movies and the Avengers and your guy's
Mm-hmm.
winning, you kind of
Mm-hmm.
revel in it.
Yeah,
You're on
yeah.
board, your guy punched out the other guy.
When the
And
Hulk takes Loki and slams him on the ground,
yeah,
everyone's like,
yeah, bam,
yeah.
bam, bam. It's you kind of feel it too, right?
Yeah.
You kind of join it. And I see this from the pulpit, and I don't want to accuse people, and I'm not, point isn't here to diminish pastors. I have a lot of pastor friends and they have a rough go of it, so I'm not trying to
Yeah.
add to their burden. But when you hear a Calvinist talk about it,
Uh-huh.
they enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what you say. They like telling their congregation, this is the secret stuff. This is the truth. This is
Mm-hmm.
what you have to believe to be in. And what the problem with it is, they don't go far enough. If they would just say, therefore, the person next to you may not be saved. In fact, you might not even be. You don't know that God's chosen you or not.
Right,
It's not
right.
your response to the gospel. That's why we don't really have a call forward, because we don't want you to respond to a gospel, because that's not how you get saved. You don't get saved from responding to the gospel. You get saved by God before the world was created. So
So they
it's
kind of leave that white elephant in the room unspoken,
oh boy,
which
they really
any
do.
thinking person would see that for themselves, but there's
Yeah,
like some gaslighting involved where you're not allowed to come out and say that.
that's right. Or if you do, they're just more equipped to
And
pull out the
yeah, they're more,
reason.
yeah, you don't
And church,
understand Calvinism.
you don't understand, yeah. Churches don't. This is a little bit of a vent, but churches this day and age don't teach their congregations to think.
That's right.
They just don't.
That's right.
So it's really
They're
um,
required what to think in order to be part of the group.
that's right. That's it. And with Calvinism, it's almost a punitive exposition when you watch it. They're proud that they have this secret. They're proud that they're telling you. They're proud that they're grinding it into your skull. You can just see it. I mean, and that's very subjective. And somebody will come on here and listen to this.
Well,
And
that's
say, I'm out of
true.
my
Yeah,
mind. But
especially it seems like they're super proud of the parts that are most unpalatable, like
yes, yes,
God's hardening people and there's nothing you can do about it. Certain
yeah,
people are reprobates and God hates the workers of iniquity. They
yeah,
they seem to revel in those negative components
yeah.
like that.
And I think it's like watching a superhero movie. They're talking about God, and they like to be part of this God. This God control. There's something attractive about it. God controls everything. We don't have to worry about anything. He's got it all under management, right? So there's a sense in which when you're talking about Calvinism, if you're a Calvinist, you're aligning with it, and you're aligning with the features of God that has been created by Calvinism. You're
Hmm.
joining those
Right,
in the
right.
moment.
It's
It doesn't mean
created
you're
by Calvinism. Features of God created by Calvinism.
yes,
It's a totem pole. It's an
that's
idol.
right.
It
Yeah.
might as well be carved out of wood.
I call it, and some people are afraid to say this, but I call it heresy. I just
Yeah,
think it comes from heresy, and it is heresy. So to
yeah.
me, but there are a lot of believers that believe Calvinism. I don't want to cast aspersions on
Well,
on
in the Bible,
people.
heresy isn't necessarily a thing that you believe per se, but it's the divisiveness of how you believe it. It's divisiveness, you
Yeah,
know, factionalism, divisiveness, and Calvinism is very factional. To require that everyone toe the line, affirming a certain set of propositions,
yeah,
is very
yeah.
factional.
It really is. I mean, I think we should be adamant about the gospel. That I'm a believer in the gospel. I think it's everything.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it is the good news. But they've destroyed the gospel in my mind because it doesn't when I was 9 years old and accepted Christ, in Calvinism, that didn't really make any difference. God made it happen. I wasn't responding to the gospel. I thought it was,
right, right,
but apparently I wasn't, which makes Jesus nearly irrelevant
right, right.
because uh, and another thing that bothers me, so I don't want to get on a roll here, but
No,
when
you're
they
good. And
talk
I have
about,
your notes over here too, by the way.
yeah,
We
we
can
can go through
also
this if you want.
we can go through these one at a time, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to comment on the fact that sometimes Calvinists will say that yes, he loves and saves some, and everybody else gets what they deserve. So in God's justice, he somehow gains glory. I don't know how, but because he's this mean, tough, brutal brute, and
Right.
he gets his way. So I guess he's glorified in a obtuse kind of way.
Well, if
But
you were regenerated, you would understand why.
yes, right, exactly. And I am, by the way. What bothers me is that God doesn't need to send people to hell to get glorified and have justice. Jesus died, creating the
Yes.
justice that was needed. That's
Yes.
all that was needed
Yeah.
to create justice for God and the sin. And then it's up to us whether we want to receive the good news. That's the gospel.
Right. It's very
Um,
simple, very straightforward.
It is very simple. And if you complicate it with secret knowledge, the minute somebody says secret knowledge, I've got narcissism running through my head.